You have all heard a phrase which is used in psychology about transference. It is the putting onto another of credit, blame, burden, or responsibility. Now let me give you this morning 3 examples of transference. Physical, financial, and moral. Physical transference. You have all seen that picture of a boy carrying another one who was a cripple. And the title of the picture was, "He's not heavy, he's my brother." That's physical transference. Another form of transference, financial. This morning when I came out here early, I went to Holiday Inn, and I went in to have pancake and maple syrup and a cup of coffee, and Mr. Eichenberger came in and said, Dr. Schuler has already paid the bill. That's financial transference. Thank you. If I had known he was going to do it, I would have ordered quail on toast. But I'm not going to talk about that kind of transference. I'm concerned about bringing to you the very essence of the life of our blessed Lord. And I want to show to you how he took upon himself, or transferred to himself, 3 different areas of our lives. There was physical transference, there was mental transference, and there was moral transference. He took upon himself all of our burdens and responsibilities. Physical, mental, moral. He took them totally and completely. He's a God, in other words, who took his own medicine. He gave us freedom. We brought a number of ills upon ourselves, and he came and took the effects of that freedom. I can remember when I was a boy, and all of you who are over 39 can thank God that you never lived in what was known as the castor oil period of life. But my grandmother used to give me castor oil. And before she would give it to me, she would take it herself and say, "See, there's nothing to it, it's easy." She was taking her own medicine. God does that. So let us see how he took his own medicine physically. As a result of the evil in this world and abuse of freedom, we have all kinds of disease and sickness. We read in the Gospel of Matthew, a prophecy taken from Isaiah, that our blessed Lord took upon himself our sicknesses and our illnesses. We have no reason to believe that our blessed Lord was ever physically sick, because it seems as if no one had any power over him until he said, "All right, this is your hour," to evil. They could not arrest him, they could not throw him over the precipice. So it's not likely that he was ever physically sick. How then did he take upon himself our sicknesses and our illnesses? I think by what might be called a very deep empathy. There isn't a mother in this audience or on television who, having had a sick child, has not said, "I would like to take on the sufferings of that child." Any one of you mothers that has a delinquent daughter or a delinquent son suffers more for that son than the son suffers. Why? Because you're identified with that child. So our blessed Lord, therefore, I feel by empathy, felt all the sicknesses of the world. When, for example, he touched the blind man, I'm sure that he felt all the blindness of the universe. He felt the blindness, for example, of a Milton. All the lights of the world went out. And when he touched the deaf man, I'm sure that he felt all the harmonies of the world to cease. He felt the deafness of a Beethoven. When he touched the leper, and he touched the leper, I'm sure he felt leprosy. And that is one of the reasons why we find often that when our blessed Lord healed the sick, that he sighed, he groaned, he wept. He transferred to himself all sicknesses, lameness, and the ills to which mankind is heir to, in order that we could never say, God does not know what it is to suffer. He had it before. He took his own medicine. Then there was mental transference. Who is going to give sympathy, for example, to the mentally retarded? Does God know anything about the mentally handicapped? Then the agnostics, the skeptics, the doubters, those who have lost their faith. Does God know anything, for example, about the despair of a Sartre or a Camus or anyone who has given up the shade and shadow of the cross for any kind of self-imposed guilt? God knows all about that, and he transferred all of those illnesses to himself. And in one dark moment when he was unfurled on a cross like a wounded eagle, the sun refused to shed its light upon the crime of deicide. Nature is not always sympathetic to our moods, but it was sympathetic to his. And in that darkness at midday, he took upon himself all of the mentally handicapped and all the doubts and despairs and anxieties of people, and expressed them all in one great moment of transference. My God, why? Why hast thou abandoned me? It was the moment when God asked a why of God. It was the second when Christ was at the very gates of hell itself. He took his own medicine. And that is why the despairing need never despair, and the hopeless need ever be without hope. He took on their hatred, their atheism. He felt it as if it were his own. And in that moment, he redeemed all of the skepticism of the universe. And then there came one other moment. It was a bigger one, in which there was not physical transference of ills, not a mental transference, but a moral transference of guilt. We're all sinners. We have a tendency to project our guilt. We blame it onto other people. Blame it onto God, we blame it on the church, we blame it on the government, we blame it on neighbors. So there's a tremendous pile of garbage someplace in this world. And all of that guilt that we have projected, he had to take upon himself to clear it out. Believe me, the only pollution that is in this world is not in the atmosphere. There's a moral pollution that is far worse. And that he took upon himself in his death. And he took all sins upon himself as if he himself were guilty. And that was why, for example, when in the courtroom of Annas he was accused of being a blasphemy, he did not answer because we have blasphemed. 7 times he spoke before Pilate, 7 times he was silent. 7 times he spoke as shepherd, 7 times he was silent as the sheep, the victim lamb that had to be sacrificed for the sins of the world. And so any sin that we have ever committed, of mind or heart or body, he took upon himself and paid the debt as if it were his own. This was the greatest of all of his acts of transference. And then when he rose from the dead, then he made it possible for us to say, well, now I'm forgiven. He's conquered all of this evil. And we give ourselves completely and totally to him. So gather up then, if you please, all of the ills that have afflicted mankind. He bore them all on a tree. Think as if mankind were today afflicted by a plague. And suppose this plague was like the Black Death that destroyed over 1/3 the population of Europe at the close of the Middle Ages. Suppose some great scientist here in California developed a cure for the plague, and he made it available for everyone. Would we go? There would be some who would say, well, how do I know he's got a cure? Why should I bother going to a laboratory? I can take care of myself in my own home. And so we would die of the plague. And that's the way it is with the cross of Christ. He has the remedy for resignation to his will in physical and mental suffering. He has the remedy for sin, forgiveness at the cross. And all who come to him are healed. The looking at Christ on the cross. Remember when the Israelites crossing the desert were bitten by poisonous serpents? And God said to Moses, make a serpent of brass that looks just exactly like that serpent, and hang it up on the crotch of a tree. And everyone who looks at that serpent on the crotch of that tree will be healed of the snake bite. Now that's crazy. There's nothing that will cure a snake bite by looking at a brass serpent. But it was a type of something else. And later on, when our blessed Lord came, he had a conversation with Nicodemus, and he said to Nicodemus, as Moses lifted up the serpent of brass on the tree, so must the Son of Man be lifted up on the cross. When our blessed Lord was lifted up on that cross, he was like that brass serpent. That brass serpent had no poison in it. But the serpent looked as if it were poison. When Christ was on the cross, he looked as if he were guilty because he bore all of our sins. But there was no more guilt or sin in him than there was poison in that serpent. And all who look upon him are healed. This is the saving Christ, who transfers all our guilt to himself, and we need only ask for his pardon. And we can continue this in our own lives and help redeem souls. I remember some years ago there was a woman wrote to me and told me to visit a brother of hers. He was in a hospital, dying of cancer. She said that he was a very evil man. He tried to destroy the morals of the young. And he now had developed a hatred of God and everyone. And she said, he's throwing out 10 priests. Will you please go to see him? Last resort, Sheen. So I knew I wouldn't be treated any better than anyone else, and so I opened the door the first night and I said, good evening, William, and closed the door. Next night I came back, said, good evening, William, how are you? Closed the door, and I went down for 40 nights straight. But I never mentioned the subject of religion, because I knew I'd be thrown out. And the last night I said, William, you're going to die tonight. He said, I know it. You want to make your peace with God? He said, no. Get out. So I knelt down alongside of his bed, and I promised the good Lord that if he would show some sign of repentance before he died, that I would build a church for the black people in Alabama. Now, I wasn't very well able to do that because I was a professor and my salary was $1,800 a year. And the church I promised was only $3,500, I think. But at any rate, I wanted to be associated with the redemption of our Lord. And after the prayer and the promise, I said, will you make your peace with God? He said, no, get out. He ordered me out. I went back to him quickly and put my head alongside of his cancerous face. And I said, William, say my Jesus mercy before you die. He said, I will not. Well, I received a word 4 o'clock in the morning that he died. And the nurse said, about 10 minutes after you left, he started saying, my Jesus mercy. And he never stopped saying it until he died at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there's a price tag on every soul in the world. And when we associate souls with the redemption of Christ, we too help save them. My good people, this is Christ. He's Savior, not primarily teacher. Saves us from our sins. The young people today and many others know him as the superstar. That's all right. It's all right. It's beginning to know him. Beginning. But to me, he's not that. A superstar always has a star in a dressing room. The media of communication love to talk with him, and they print everything that he says. But he was not a superstar. He had no star above his dressing room. As a matter of fact, he was thrown out into a garbage heap and crucified. What is Christ if he's not a superstar? Do you know what he is? He's a super scar. For when he rose from the dead, he had 5 hideous scars on hands and feet and side. And believe me, there's a great deal of credit that is to be given to Thomas the Apostle. Sure, he was a doubter. Sure, he was a skeptic. But he had great worth, and he bequeathed to us an excellent lesson, and that lesson was, I'm not going to believe anyone unless he can show me that he loves even to a point of sacrifice. And if Christ brought God's love to this earth, then he's got to show love even to the extent of giving his life. I want therefore to see some scars, some marks of love. And when I can put my finger into his hand and my hand into his side, then I'll not be incredulous. Then I will believe. This is the Christ, the superstar, the one who was wounded out of love for us. And this is the Christ we believe. This is the Christ we preach. This is the Christ we love. Thank you. Bye, and God love you.
And now, Archbishop Sheen's message, Christ's Self-Giving, Part 1.
I can remember when I was a boy, I saw the predecessor, really, of this church. I was an altar boy in the Cathedral of Peoria, Illinois. And immediately on the other side of the alley, there was an Amish church. And the Amish people used to come at 9 o'clock in the morning and stay until 5 in the afternoon. And they would drive in 20 or 25 miles, with horses, of course. And they had a number of barns. And they stalled their horses, and they ate their dinner there. This was the original drive-in church, I should want Dr. Schuller to know. Now, I am going to, you people over here have a great advantage of me over the rest. You get my better side, the back. I am going to try to bring home to you today, I think, the very essence of being a Christian. What it means. And since it is a profoundly spiritual talk, I am going to begin with a couple of examples. The first is about a Nazi guard who was on trial in Frankfurt. He said that at one time he was commissioned to burn about 1,000 Jewish corpses that were piled up in a barracks. He was ordered to pour gasoline over them, set them afire. When he went up to pour the gasoline on them, all the bodies were nude except one. That was a young girl, about 18, alive. He said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "I am a Jewess from Salonika." "Do you think that I could live when all my other people are dying?" Identification, point number one. Second story. There is a small group of people in Russia called the Urodovy. Urodovy in Russia, I am told, in Russian, means born fool. For the most part, these are Baptists. They go into concentration camps, and when they find that someone is to be punished, they ask that the scourging and the beating and so forth be given to them instead of to the guilty one. Their argument is this: if that prisoner is beaten, he will hate back. And the content of hate in the world will be increased. If, however, I love back, then I increase the content of love and forgiveness. They take on the punishment that was to be given to others. That's why they're born fools. I give these two examples to explain a text of St. Paul to the Philippians. I once heard someone read the epistle to the Filipinos not very long ago, but this was actually to the Philippians, in which St. Paul says that Christ emptied himself when he became man, emptied himself of all of the appearance of glory, and took upon himself the form of a slave, not servant, slave. In other words, our Lord would not remain up there in heavenly headquarters when there was suffering and pain and hate and disease in this world, just as that Jewish girl wanted to be identified with her own people. so he willed to be identified also with his own creatures. And secondly, when he took upon himself the form of a slave, he took on the punishment that we deserved. For by our sins we deserve death. He took that death upon himself, as if he himself were guilty. This is why we're forgiven. He was the original Eurydice, the born fool. What humiliation did this require for God to become enfleshed? Well, let me give this example. Suppose you were very much concerned about the way dogs acted in Los Angeles. I wanted to cover a broad area here. They didn't obey their masters. They barked at postmen. They scratched at front doors. They snapped at grocery men, and they never obeyed an order. And you wanted to teach the dogs of Los Angeles to be good. And suppose you had the power to empty yourself. Suppose you could tear off your body, empty yourself of your body, and just keep your mind, your soul, your spirit. And you would take this soul and spirit of yours and put it into the body of a dog. The first humiliation would be, though you knew that you had a mind that could conceive the stars, you would be guided by instinct. Though you knew that you could speak words, you would only bark. And you would subject yourself to all of the limitations of that canine organism. And a second humiliation, you would have to spend the rest of your life with dogs, knowing that you were 1,000 times better. If you would find it, then in the end, the other dogs, instead of following your example, would turn on you and tear you to pieces. Now, if you would find it humiliating to go into the body of a dog, what do you think it is for God to come into the body of a man? And to understand pain, identify himself with our suffering, weak humanity. Incidentally, here is the only answer there is to the problem of evil. It is asked, does God know anything about suffering? Does God know what it is to be a refugee? Was he ever born in a slum? Did he ever go without food for 3 days, or 5 days, 7 days? Does God know what it is to have a migraine headache, as if his head was being pierced with thorns? Does God know anything about being a refugee and driven out of one country to another? Does he know anything about being in prison? Does he know anything about the accident wards? And the people come in the darkness of night with wounded hands and feet. Yes, God knows what all of these things are. He took them and he bore them and he suffered them and then conquered them by the resurrection. This was the first humiliation of emptying and self-giving, becoming like the rest of men. And secondly, he had to spend the rest of his life with stupid apostles. Slow to learn, tardy of intellect. We find it hard sometimes to deal with stupid people. Imagine the divine intellect dealing with fishermen, crude, uneducated minds, so that he would have to say the night of the Last Supper with sorrow, "Philip, have I been with you all this time, and still you do not understand?" Dealing with hecklers, protesters, like Thomas. When our blessed Lord is talking about going to heaven, preparing a way for them, the heckler says, "What do you mean the way? We don't even know where you're going." This is emptying. So he emptied himself of his glory and became man to atone for our sins. Now let us apply this to ourselves, to make it very concrete. The incarnation of Christ means incarnate, in the flesh. It means that God became infleshed. Mary gave him a human nature. That human nature was absolutely supple in his hands. It was totally obedient to him and to the Father's will. This is what Christianity means, that Christ is now saying to us today. Peter, Paul, Mary, John, Anne, will you give me another human nature? Give me a human nature like Mary gave me one. Give me a human nature that'll be so totally mine that I can teach through it, that I can act through it, that I can suffer through it, that I can redeem through it, that I can be kind and forgiving through it. So the incarnation is not something that happened. It is something that is happening. Take this pencil. This pencil is absolutely flexible and supple in my hand. I was glad I found this in my pocket. I wanted to use it as an example, and I didn't think about it before I came. But this pencil is absolutely supple in my hand. If I wanted to write the word God, it will write the word God. That's the way the human nature of Christ was in his hands. That's the way he wants our human nature to be in his hands. Suppose this pencil, however, were endowed with self-consciousness. When I wanted to write the word God, suppose it wrote the word dog. I couldn't do anything with it. It'd be useless. And so Christ can do a great deal with many of us. We're not supple in his hands. We're not obedient in his hands. And being a saint really means just giving ourselves so totally and completely to him that we're his. And the reason we get all crossed up is because, well, that upright finger is the vertical will of God, and my finger here is the horizontal finger is my will. And when I cross the divine will with my will, I get a cross. And in psychological language, that's a complex. I get all mixed up. Too many people today are concerned about identity. I want to be me, I want to be me. Nonsense! Who wants to be me? No lover wants to be me. First of all, it's bad grammar, but we'll apart from that. Nobody wants to be me. We want to be someone else's. When you love, I want to be thine. When we're Christian, I want to be thine. This is the essence of being a Christian. So in these brief moments, I hope that I've given to you now the challenge to give yourself totally and completely to him. Be free. No, not to be my own, but to be his. I slipped his fingers. I escaped his feet. I ran and hid. For him I feared to meet. One day I passed him, fettered on a tree. He turned his head and looked and beckoned me. Neither by speed nor speech could he prevail. Each hand and foot was pinioned by a nail. He could not run, nor clasp me if he tried. But with his eyes, he bade me reach his side. For pity's sake, thought I, I'll set you free. Nay, take this cross, said he, and follow me. And so did I follow him who could not move, an uncaught captive in the hands of love. Thank you, bye, and God love you.
Now Archbishop Sheen's final message, Christ's Self-Giving, Part 2.
My dear friends in Christ, both inside the church and outside the church. I mean physically, not spiritually. You get my better side occasionally. Dr. Schuller said he would send you a copy of my sermon. I wish you would send me a copy, because I never have copies of my talks. I never write them out. They're born out of long hours of meditation. And then another reason is I once heard an Irish woman who heard a bishop reading a sermon, and she said, "Glory be to God, if he can't remember it, how does he expect us to?" I will therefore expect you to remember every word I said. Dr. Schuller was right. We have made great advances in ecumenism, and I hope we make many more. We're making efforts. Now, here's an effort that was made in New York not very long ago. Someone went to a policeman in New York and said, "When is the best time to leave New York City in a trailer?" The policeman said, "At 8:30 in the morning. All the Catholics will be at Mass. The Jews will be on the golf course because they've already had their Sabbath. The Protestants will still be in bed because their services start later." And so he entered Lincoln Tunnel and passed through it without any difficulty whatever. When he got to the other end, he was hit in the back of the trailer by a Seventh-day Adventist who was late for work. Now, if I announced the subject that I was going to talk to you about today, you might not remember it. So I am going to tell you what it is in Greek. I asked Dr. Schuller how many of his congregation would he estimate had forgotten their Greek. He said 7. So, for the benefit of the 7, I shall have to give you a translation of the word later on. And this word now we can introduce into the English language. It is the Greek word skolop, and it is spelled S-K-O-L-O-P. scallop. It is found in the letter of St. Paul, in which he tells about the revelations that he had received, and he said, lest he should be proud of those revelations, God gave him a scallop. 3 times he asked that the scallop be removed. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. You keep your scallop. Now the word scallop is translated in the New English Bible as physical handicap. It is translated in the Latin Vulgate Bible as the stimulus of the flesh. In the King James Version, it's the thorn in the flesh. Now, what does the word scallop really mean? The scallop really means a stake. One of these wooden poles that you drive into the ground, so it is much more than the thorn of the flesh. A scallop, therefore, is any kind of handicap that we have that we cannot get rid of. And everybody in the world has got a scallop. You have at least one. I have several. Demosthenes had a scallop. He stuttered, this great Greek orator. But he got over his scallop by putting pebbles in his mouth and practicing talking. Moses had a scallop. Moses stuttered. Suppose we realistically recited the 10 Commandments in stuttering. And Moses asked God many times to get rid of this scallop of his. And Moses said, I can't talk. God said, that's all right. He says, Aaron will talk for you. You keep your scallop. John the Baptist had a scallop. He was in prison. And here was the Lord working miracles. Well, it was only natural for John the Baptist to think, well, if he is the Lord and Savior, he certainly ought to be able to get me out of prison. And he sent emissaries to our Lord and to ask him if he was really the one. He was becoming doubtful because he had to bear this scallop. Now, each and every one of us have a scallop. It may be some kind of physical sickness. It could be mental illness. The fact that you have crutches, braces, in a wheelchair. Cancer. Marriage, family troubles. Wayward son. Wayward daughter. The place where you work. The particular work that you are doing. And on and on. But you can think, as I talk to you, about a particular scallop that you have. Now let us ask, first of all, what the scallop of St. Paul was. There's been all kinds of speculation about this scallop. See, the Latin translation would make it out that he had trouble with his passions. Another suggestion was that he had migraine headaches. I think probably the real answer is he had trouble with his eyes, disease of the eyes. Because first of all, he said that he was a very unsightly appearance. And on another occasion, he slapped the high priest. And an official said, "Why did you strike the high priest?" He said, "I didn't know that he was the high priest." Then he wrote to the Galatians and he said, "The Galatians would have given their eyes to me." And at the end of the letters he said, "See with what big characters I write." It could have been that, but your guess is as good as anyone. The fact is that he had a scallop, and he probably tried to get rid of it because he kept a doctor with him for many of his travels, Dr. Luke. But he still had it. So, what we are concerned about today is what we are going to do about our scallop, and particularly the scallop that we cannot get rid of. Not a scallop that is made of evil habits. I'm not speaking of that kind. And the answer to the problem of scallops is this. Really, it does not make a great deal of difference what happens to us. What makes the difference is how we react to what happens. That's the point. Our blessed Lord told the story of two women at a mill. Here were two stones, one on top of the other. The wheat was put in between the stones. A long pole extended from the stones. And there were two women that were grinding mills. They were under the same sun and exactly the same occupation. Same economic circumstances. One was saved, the other was lost. It doesn't make any difference what happens to us. It all depends upon how we react to what happens. Take the two thieves on either side of our blessed Lord on the cross. When they began their sufferings and were crucified alongside of our blessed Lord, they were identical in the sense that they both blasphemed and cursed our blessed Lord. Then there began to be a reaction. They couldn't get out of their scallop. The scallop was the crucifixion. One of them rebelled. The one on the left. And so he said to our blessed Lord, "If you're the Son of God, save thyself and us." That is sometimes the way the power of God is judged. Namely, what's he going to do to help us? To the thief on the left, God had no other power except the power to take him down from that cross. And if he did not do it, he was not God. And why did he want to be taken down? He wanted to be taken down to go on with the dirty business of stealing. Now the thief on the other side began to see that maybe I deserve this. That's sometimes a good vision of a scallop. After all, really, we all receive less blows than we deserve. We know it very well. And so this thief on the right then said to his brother thief on the left, "We are suffering justly for our sins." And then looking to our blessed Lord, "This man has done no wrong." And then he made the prayer not to be taken down. He offered the prayer to be taken up. And he said, "Remember me. Remember me when thou shalt come into thy kingdom." What faith! Here was a revolutionist looking at a man on a central cross, and to him that crown of thorns was a royal diadem. The blood was his royal purple. The crucifixion was his installation. And he saw in him the giver of a kingdom. And he asked to be remembered. That was all. And our blessed Lord said, "This day thou shalt be with me in paradise." And that thief died a thief, for he stole paradise. And paradise can be stolen again. Here are two reactions to exactly the same scallop: physical pain. And the two reactions that any of us can have in the face of a scallop is rebellion or acceptance. Rebellion. What did I do to deserve this? Is God good? When one says, "What do I do to deserve this?" one is almost implying that others deserve it. This rebellion always causes bitterness. And the other attitude is the attitude of acceptance. Well, the good Lord knows all things. He's given me this cross. It comes from His loving hands. And I'm going to take it. Then it begins to be sweet. And He carried it first. So we accept it in His cross, not apart from it. We may then eventually get to see that perhaps it was a work of love. Sometimes lovers squeeze too tight. And maybe God sometimes squeezes souls too tight. And He bruises. And when He does, then we may come to understand too that perhaps He just over many of us raises His hand in blessing. But over other souls, He lays and presses His hand upon us. And when He presses His hand on us, He leaves a scar. And when we go before Him on the last day, that is what He will look for. This is the way He will be known. For all the suffering people, therefore, who are hearing me, and for all of us who have scallops that we cannot overcome, do not let pain go to waste. That is the thought that strikes me every time I pass a hospital. Love does not destroy pain, but love makes it bearable. If you lose your purse and discover that some very needy person found it, the loss is softened. How often lovers will say to one another when one is suffering, "I wish that I could take your pain, your suffering." Every mother says that to a babe who is sick. "I wish I could take it." Now that's what our Lord did. He took our pain that we deserved on account of sin. And we will therefore take any scallop that he sends us, and we'll endure it. And say, dear Lord, I do not know why. Just as I do not understand, rather a mouse would not understand who was chewing a piano keys, why a very, very clever pianist would sit down at the keys and play Tchaikovsky. The mouse would say, why the disturbance of the keys? Poor mouse doesn't understand anyone who knows Tchaikovsky that well. We do not understand God's plans. And if we had the power now, each and every one of us, to take our cross, our scallop, and to bring it here in front of the choir, and throw our scallop here, before that great basket of flowers. Then after we had a tremendous pile of scallops, the Lord would say to us, all right, now everyone go to that pile and take a scallop that you like. Do you know which one you'd look for? Your own. Bear it then out of love for the Lord. Bye, and God love you.
Archbishop Fulton Sheen was born 75 years ago in El Paso, Illinois, and became a priest in the Catholic Church just after the First World War. He is considered by almost everybody a great enigma. Those who like to disparage his evangelism have a difficult time accounting for his extraordinary academic record. Those who claim him as a conservative are continually amazed at his positions in behalf of statist welfarism. Those who have been inspired by his anti-communist lectures, which began in the early 30s, cannot understand his current calls for withdrawing from Vietnam. Archbishop Sheen has served as head of the Worldwide Department for the Propagation of the Faith. After that, he went dutifully to Rochester, New York, whence he has recently been delivered. In the early 50s, he began a network television show opposite Milton Berle, creating the scandal of the decade by beating Mr. Berle in the ratings, who subsequently reported ruefully that he had hired new writers, namely Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. He is the author of 64 books. He is, in my opinion, the greatest preacher in English. Bishop Sheen is eloquently committed to the notion that whole nations have to pay a price to Providence for their sins. He quoted recently from Abraham Lincoln, and I would like to ask him to explain what it was that A. Lincoln said, and B. what it was he had in mind in quoting Lincoln.
Was it Lincoln's statement that he never feared that America would perish from without, but that he feared that it would perish from within?
That was a Lincoln statement. It wasn't the one that you quoted. I have it here if you want to refresh your memory, although I was under the impression that you never needed to have your memory refreshed.
Oh, yes, I do. No, that's not the one that I thought. When did I quote this?
In 1967.
Oh, yes. When I was talking about Vietnam. Yes.
Well, what Lincoln said was that the awful calamity of civil war which now desolates the land may be but a punishment inflicted upon us for our presumptuous sins to the needful end of our national reformation as a whole people. Or rather, he asked that question and then answered it by saying, intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. Now, do I understand you to be applying Lincoln's theological analysis of what it was that brought on the Civil War to the existing situation? Is the Vietnam thing to be understood as a form of national tribulation, which is in some way related to what we have earned?
No, Mr. Buckley, I did not mean to imply that. I merely meant to imply that there is a moral order and that there is such a thing as retribution. Nations have very much gotten away from that. Primitive people still retain it, but I certainly did not wish to say that it applied to the Vietnam War. I had in mind, for example, something that a missionary told me some time ago about an injustice that they had committed, and that particular day they had stolen the missionary's axe. And that particular day measles broke out in the camp. And simultaneously, someone had sent a plane above the camp of the cannibals to see what had happened to the missionary. And they said, that's the evil spirit that sent us these red blotches because we stole the missionary's axe. So these primitive peoples had a sense of retribution. I was saying that Lincoln also had a sense of retribution, but I did not mean to apply it necessarily to the Vietnam War, except every kind of war is a kind of a retribution upon the people.
Can that be understood in an extra-theological context?
Almost in a physical context. For every action is a contrary and equal reaction, yes.
Well, could it be, as some might argue, that a failure to prosecute the war in Vietnam might earn us a very considerable and more formidable retribution in the future?
No, I would not mean to imply that.
I know you wouldn't.
No, because I certainly
But how would you handle people who did?
Well, first of all, this is a peculiar kind of war in which there was not really a great prosecution of the war. How different it was from World War II. What characterized this war, and here America must be very much credited, was restraint. Here we are, one of the great powers of the world. We take on an insignificant power. As far as explosiveness and so forth is concerned, we had far more than the enemy. Maybe the greatness of a man is often to be judged by his restraint of power. That was the great wonder of Christ, that having divine power, he used so little of it. And so America shows and has shown great restraint in this war.
Well, but is it always commendable to use restraint? Or is restraint sometimes an expression of cowardice or lack of conviction?
It can be both. First of all, one may not show restraint in order to absorb evil. Take, for example, turning the other cheek. If there are 10 men in a line, and I preach hate to them, and say, you must destroy your brother, and one man turns and strikes his neighbor, 2 strikes 3, when will it ever stop? It will stop only at a point when one man turns around and absorbs the evil. In that sense, restraint can absorb evil. From another point of view, restraint does not absorb evil. It sometimes may increase it. The crime certainly on our streets today, the turn of law by which there is compassion shown more for the mugger than for the mugged, more for the one who does the violence than for the victim. This is a kind of restraint which is not commendable and which I fear is bringing some trouble to our nation.
Well, if you translate that into international terms, might it be argued that much too much international restraint is being shown towards those nations in the world which live by aggression and which preach a hatred and whose evil deeds might have been aborted, or whose careers might have been aborted a generation ago by the use of strategic power?
You probably mean Russia, huh?
Yeah.
No, I think that restraint is here commendable. Because I am afraid that any show of force would have brought retaliation, and it could very conceivably be the last war.
But what when they were not in a position to retaliate effectively? I'm asking a very serious question, namely, is it a part of the Christian obligation in international terms to exert oneself when one can do so without bringing on apocalypse? If it is predictable to reasonable men of active conscience that to do so at that moment will be to spare the world an ordeal tomorrow. For instance, a preemptive strike against Hitler in 1938 is now something that almost everybody wishes we had done, including you?
Yes.
Why then not say a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union in 1949?
Well, now we're taking back the mentality of 1970 to 1949. And when we go back to that mentality, Russia was considered a democracy. Russia was considered on our side. I can remember once giving a lecture in Youngstown, Ohio, on the fact that Russia was going to take over Eastern Europe. And some very high important person said, "How dare you say that? This day is past. We live in a democracy." And in the 1949, that's what we were thinking about.
I think, Archbishop Sheen, that you're a little bit, a few years off, aren't you? Fulton,
Yes,
Missouri.
36,
Fulton,
right.
Missouri was 46
Yes.
when the Cold War was declared.
Right.
And even the Democratic president had recognized it by 1949, indeed rather dramatically, with the Truman Doctrine and so on. So whereas I think it is true that the illusions you identify were widely shared in 1945, 44, 45,
Yes.
46, by 1949, the animosity of Stalin was pretty plain spoken.
Yes, but I cannot look back and feel that we should have resorted to violence in those days. I think we would have brought a greater apocalypse upon the world.
But you can, as regards 1938.
Yes, hypothetically, 1938.
Bishop Sheen, in your indictments of the American role in Vietnam, you have used the figure that it, in fact, is costing us something in the neighborhood of $1 million per death. Now, that has had the effect on most people of saying, what an unspeakable war. It has exactly the opposite reaction on me, because it seems to me that since everyone would agree that we have it within our power to kill people much more cheaply and don't, it does suggest that we are going out of our way to keep from killing people. If we are spending $1 million per death of a single enemy, then doesn't this suggest that the discriminatory apparatus that we are using is highly tuned? And isn't that a mark of civilization?
First of all, what I said that it was costing $1 million a day. If there were 24 men, $1 million an hour. If there were 24 men killed in a day, then it would be $1 million a day. That was the statistic.
Which is not far off. Which is not far off.
Yes.
Actually, it's probably it's in the neighborhood of 250,
Yes.
300 people a week.
Now, how are you going to turn that?
Well, what I'm saying is, if we wanted to kill more people, we could do so much more cheaply by Dresden-type bombings. Our reluctance to do so, or failure to do so, it seems to me in terms of moral arithmetic, is praiseworthy. And under the circumstances, I have never understood the use of the high ratio of dollars per death as an argument pointing to the immorality of the war, but to the contrary.
Yes. It was not so much to point just to the immorality of this war, but rather to the immorality of war itself. What I was doing was to go back to figures that had been gathered by some historian about how much it cost to kill a man in different wars. For example, it is estimated that it cost Julius Caesar 75 cents a man. In World War I, it cost something like 20,000. In World War II, it cost 200,000. Then I adduced the figure that it cost $1 million an hour in Vietnam. I was not speaking about moral arithmetic. I was just speaking about the terrific economic burden that is thrust upon mankind in virtue of fighting. So I would not, you're very clever, however, to draw that conclusion that it was an evidence of our restraint, and I can see the value in the deduction, but that was not my purpose.
But your purpose surely isn't to illegitimize war, is it? That is to say, do you not believe that some wars are defensible? In fact, some wars are imperative?
Yes, I could see a reason for a defensive war.
Yeah.
If we were invaded.
Well, then, therefore, it becomes a strategic question whether a particular war is a defensive war, correct?
Yes.
I mean, it becomes a theoretical question whether or not Vietnam does relate to the defense of this. Right. And that, therefore, you would not criticize as a class those people who defend the Vietnam War.
I certainly would not.
However, you happen yourself to feel that the time is past when you would choose to defend it.
Yes. And the statement that I made about it, Mr. Buckley, was about 3 years ago, when the statement was much more applicable than it is today. And furthermore, I was giving a Christian appraisal, not a political appraisal. And I was then speaking of what I had spoken of before, namely about the value of restraint. That I felt that if we gave up in Vietnam, we would have given a moral example to the world, and perhaps would have won the moral opinion of the world. 3 years later, it's impossible to do it, but we are withdrawing, and we're withdrawing to now at a time when it makes it possible for the world to conclude that we've lost our first war.
Well, let me ask you, sir, if I may, in that connection, to what extent does a nation feel a corporate Christian obligation to step in order to defend one's brother, using the metaphor national terms? Suppose I put it this way. We suffer in America, I think it is accurate to say, some kind of a trauma as a result of our failure to go to the help of the Jewish people in Germany, who, as a result of our defective reflexes, were practically wiped out as a people. Now, it seems to me that two things are plain from that experience. One, that we cannot bring them back to life. And two, that the purpose of reminding ourselves about Buchenwald and the rest of it was to keep the conscience from going to sleep again. Now, if there is evidence that a genocide is continuing in other parts of the world, is this something concerning which we ought to be more active? Ralph Hawkworth writes a very successful play in Broadway which criticizes Pope Pius XII for his delinquency, I think historically inaccurate, in not moving faster to mobilize sentiment in behalf of a rescue mission to the Jewish people in Germany. Now, will somebody be writing a play about us or about the present Pope for failure to mobilize sentiment to rescue, for instance, the Christians who are being exterminated in China?
Yes, but given genocide, given the extinction of Christians in China and in northern Vietnam, 1.25 million of them brought down to the south, expelled, is war the only means? Are there not other means? One, of course, is dialogue, which is not always successful. But I wonder if we, for example, did not begin to spend more of our money in helping people, maybe indirectly. We are 7th in the world in helping the poor of other nations. We are the richest nation in the world. We are only 6% of the world's population. We control 46% of the world's goods. Would it not be better if instead of all of this money spent on armaments, if we didn't come to the rescue of the people of China, northern Vietnam, the Catholics there, and the Jewish victims, in some other way than by war? I wonder if war today is not outlawed.
Well, I think that that's a point that an awful lot of very active people worry about almost full time. But before we press that question, would it make sense to acknowledge that America understands itself to be helping people by using as much money as America does on armaments? For instance, to what extent does one value freedom? Now, a lot of people we know value freedom even above life because people are constantly dying in behalf of freedom. In fact, the $80 billion that we spend can be interpreted as an act of international philanthropy, since we are providing a shield not only for ourselves, but for instance for Western Europe, for Canada, for Latin America, and therefore isn't that a form of philanthropy? Here would be another way to put it. If you were, let's say, an Italian, would you prefer that America continue to spend as much money as America is spending on armaments, or spend less on that and more on direct relief? For Italians, I should think that this would depend on the extent to which you understood the strategical situation, and that you might very responsibly get down on your knees at night and thank the American people for accepting a great military burden which has direct philanthropic consequences.
I do not wish to argue against that because I do not know all of the facts. But at the same time, I am mindful of the Maginot Line, where a tremendous military defense was built up, which proved, from a military point of view, totally ineffective. And I believe, therefore, that the social approach, just think if we spent the same amount of money that we're spending on armaments today to help the world, how much better we would be, how much better the world would be.
Well, I think it would be much worse, because the barbarians would be in complete control. Do you think that the people are better off in China because we didn't resist them, even though we had an opportunity to do so 20 years ago? It seems to me plain that most of the misery of the world is the result not of natural conditions, but is the result of the active operations of governments which are administered by men. It took government to translate Buchenwald into Mein Kampf into Buchenwald. And under the circumstances, isn't America's unique challenge to accept the political responsibility and the military responsibility?
Yes, now, I concede you have a point here, and a very good one. One, because governments have no eternal end. They have only a temporal end. And being such, they have to use temporal means in order to attain it. We simply cannot apply ideal social goods and Christian principles, Christians that have eternal ends, to the temporal ends of government. And I certainly would not want to be pushed into the corner of saying that there should be no preparedness, any more than I would say we shouldn't have a lock on the front door.
But it's simply a matter of balance.
Yes.
And you think that there is an imbalance in the existing situation?
Yes, I do.
But isn't that caused rather by the Soviet Union than by us? I mean, are we redundantly protective? Do we have too many locks on the door?
I don't know. That's a matter of fact and statistics. I wouldn't know.
Archbishop, I wonder if I could ask you to comment on something which fascinates a lot of people non-Catholics, for instance, and distresses a lot of people, Catholics, for instance, which is the apparent erosion of faith. I saw recently a statistic that the church-going population of America has declined from 49% to 43% in the past 10 years, but that whereas the Protestant slide has been about 15%, the Catholic slide has been more substantial. Now, I know there are those who wonder whether this is simply that we're all being manipulated by the zeitgeist, or whether there is a causal relationship between the erosion of faith and the ecumenism of the Vatican Council.
No, I should not say that ecumenism was the cause of the erosion. Certainly the zeitgeist is partly the cause, and very much the cause. From one point of view, Mr. Buckley, there probably was never before as much faith as there is today. Now, I'm putting faith in quotation marks. When God is disposed of, the gods arise. Faith today is taking the form of superstition. We have 2,200 newspapers, I believe, daily newspapers in the United States. 1,700 of them carry astrological columns. Was there ever such faith before in the stars as there is now? And as Shakespeare said, think of the new faiths that are arising without any basis of credibility. As Shakespeare says, what damned error but some sober brow will bless it and approve it with a text. And so, on the one side, faith, without quotes, is indeed declining, partly on account of the zeitgeist, and on the other hand, it is increasing. The gods are multiplying. We have almost polytheism instead of monotheism.
Well, could it be though that the singular attraction of the Catholic Church over the years, namely its dogmatic constancy, has now been so diluted as to cease to be singularly appealing to those people who were looking for a transcendent mooring and had, over a period of centuries, found it in the Catholic Church in a way that they were able to justify rationally. Is this something that was surrendered during the 60s as a result of the ecumenical passions?
I will arrive at your conclusion from a different premise.
It's an old trick.
No, but it's not really almost to supplement it. The Church and Christianity has pretty much had a kind of a monopoly about God, and particularly the supernatural. It aggrandized to itself this divine order and kept the natural order outside. So our distinction between the two was quite rigid and severe. With the result that the natural order, the political, social order, had to find its own deities, develop its own religions, a naturalism, a humanism, an existentialism, scientism, pietism, whatever you please. At the Vatican Council, which I attended, one did not find any discussion of that rigid distinction between the supernatural and the natural order. In other words, we are today paying a price for a kind of a monopolistic theological capitalism.
Well, is it a price that in fact yields to the very, very old passion of many people to immanentize the eschaton and to utopianize the world? Are we in fact attempting really a secular idealism to which much of religion has shrunk?
Yes, the secular, of course, has indeed a great appeal today. But there's a reaction against that. Who is more dead today than Harvey Cox's Secular City? Because the Secular City didn't turn out to be quite as idealistic as Harvey Cox thought it was. And even in the secular order today, look at those who are trying to find hope. For example, Jürgen Moltmann, the Lutheran German theologian who has written so much about hope, says that he went into Prague one day to attend a communist congress. And he picked up a copy of Time. And on the cover, God is dead. He went to the Communist Congress. The programs had already been printed weeks before, and the title was, God is not dead, quite dead. Then he went to a Communist Congress in Marienbad in Czechoslovakia, where there were Protestants and Catholics and Communists in discussion. All of the Protestants and the Catholics talked about the necessity of the church getting into the world, immanentism, involvement, secularism. What did the communists talk about? Transcendence. And now even Time has changed its cover and God is dead.
Yes, he might not be, right?
He may not be quite dead.
Abby Hoffman says God is dead and he did it for the kids. Well, there are those who do wonder about the apparently infinite capacity of the Catholic Church to coexist with heresy, or as a matter of fact, apostasy. Francis McMahon, the theologian, has referred to imminent apostates, his point being that, incidentally, I should say that he's a very liberal theologian and has been over the years identified with what one calls left-wing causes, but all of a sudden he has become Mr. Orthodoxy, and he says that the Pope ought to affirm Catholic dogma by excluding people from the church, by excommunicating them, who in fact plainly refuse to subscribe to the basic articles of faith. And there is a considerable question why that in fact doesn't happen, or is this an expression of charity in mid-century mode?
It's too bad that he didn't read the parable about the cockle and the wheat.
Remind us what that says.
Well, the wheat was sown by the farmer, and during the night the enemy came and sowed the cockle. And it was suggested that the cockle be torn up. And the Lord said, no, you will also destroy the wheat. Let both grow until the harvest. We must remember that the church is not just made up of saints, it's made up of sinners. And if it were made up for saints, there wouldn't be any room for me.
We wouldn't want that.
You mind if I go on water power as well as wind power
That's
for a
right.
while?
Well, do I understand that the situation today is different, Archbishop, from what it was during those other periods in religious history when it was thought that the act of excommunication was actually an affirmation of Christian solidarity, which was strategically necessary and even strategically kind? Is the situation different now from when, let us say, the Manichaeans were excommunicated?
Yes.
I mean, apart from the obvious differences.
Remember, excommunication holds only for those who have the faith. Mm-hmm. It does not hold for those who have not. Remember how many appealed to Pius XII to have him excommunicate Hitler. What good would it do to excommunicate Hitler? So we're living in entirely different times today.
No, but Hitler never pretended to be a Catholic.
No. Well, that's precisely what I'm saying, that you cannot use excommunication with those that have not the faith.
No, but I'm talking about people who do pretend to be Catholics. For instance, the gang who runs the National Catholic Reporter, incidentally an organization which I sponsored when it was founded. But in any case, I should think that they couldn't get past the second phrase of the Apostles' Creed without gagging. And the question is, who runs this joint, they or the Pope? And I should think that a pretty good argument for salvaging any meaning at all of Christianity is to insist that there is a distinction between, let's say, Mao Zedong and yourself. And that if Mao Zedong claims to be a Catholic, there's got to be somebody around who says, no, he isn't. Does that follow?
Yes. Now, what conclusion are you going to draw?
Well, I'm asking you why the present Pope doesn't excommunicate anybody. We excommunicated a couple people who refused integration down South Carolina, come think of it, or New Orleans.
They were suspended, yes.
They're excommunicated. I know, because he told me. Leander Perez told me he was excommunicated. Incidentally, you'd be glad to know that he sneaked away to Mississippi to go to church on Sunday.
Yes, I know that.
Which is nice. But my point is that why in mid-20th century is the act of excommunication not invoked, whereas it has been invoked throughout history. Tyrrell was excommunicated for far lesser offenses than are recited every day in Commonweal magazine.
Right.
And I'm asking you to explain that to me.
Well, again, it's a change of the spirit of the times. I think the Church has become much more patient and kind. It's more related to the world than it was then. The Church was very much locked up in itself. After all, what the Vatican Council did was to relate us to the world. First of all, in the Vatican Council, the world came into the Church, and the Church went out to the world.
But did it?
Yes.
Well, then why doesn't it follow that more people welcomed it? That more people go to church, more people take vocation and study to become priests and nuns?
It's going to take a long time for the yeast to work through the dough. But there was for example, at Vatican Council I, there was not one single bishop from Asia or Africa in 1870. Not one. In the Vatican Council II, 61% of the bishops were from Americas, Asia, and Africa. So that the Church has become much more related to the world. Being related to the world, I think, has become much more compassionate of sinners. And I would say that perhaps that is the spirit that has changed us from the rigidity of excommunication to the patient bearing of offenses.
Well, would you describe to me an excommunicable offense?
I would say willful and deliberate desecration of the Blessed Sacrament, the breaking of the seal of confession.
Well, this would, of course, apply to a priest.
That's right.
But for a layman?
Again, desecration of the Blessed Sacrament could apply to him.
And is it possible to desecrate the Blessed Sacrament by, let us say, participating in a black mass?
That would depend upon the degree of participation and the degree of proof. It's going to be very difficult to prove any participation in the black mass.
If an individual says, I cannot believe in the divinity of Christ, is that an excommunicable statement?
No. The Church would not excommunicate a man for saying that. It would not be a true statement, but it would not be excommunicable.
Wingfield.
Going back to what you were discussing earlier, I get a sense in recent days of a kind of much sharper separation between what I used to think of as religious conscience and the so-called real world, the natural world. And I think of it in political terms, I have to admit. It seems that most Americans are more upset by the fact that, for instance, newspapers discussed what happened in Song Mi in Vietnam, the killing of women and children, than they are about the actual episode that American soldiers allegedly, almost certainly, gunned down women and children in cold blood. A sense that we've come to a point in America where if we can dehumanize other people enough, we don't really care what happens to them, whether we call them Black Panthers or whether we call them dinks or gooks in Vietnam. Do you think that perhaps, at some risk to itself, that the Church might have to begin reaffirming, if not the Christianity, at least the humanity of people that we don't like to think of as very pleasant people, say communists or Black Panthers or radicals?
No, I'd agree with you absolutely. Because, one, there is a great potential, even in the enemies. Take, for example, Paul. When Paul was persecuting the church, within 5 or 10 years after the resurrection, I am sure that there must have been thousands of Christians who were praying that the good Lord would send a good case of coronary thrombosis to Paul. Get rid of this enemy. Here was a learned man. The rest of the men were all fishermen, except the one man who came from Judea, who was on the right side of the tracks, namely Judas. Here was a learned man, and they must have said, send somebody to answer Saul. And God said, all right, I'll send somebody to answer Saul. I will send Saul. So in answer to your question, I agree with you, yes. We must get back to the human and to see the divine image in everyone.
Do you think, just to follow that up, in more immediate terms, that it might, in fact, be necessary for the Church to take some rather unpopular positions when it does, in fact, reaffirm the humanity of people who other people...
Almost every position the Church takes today is unpopular.
Ms. Sinkowitz.
I've noticed lately a lack of the idea of community worship in the average parish church around somehow the satisfaction of worshiping together like the early Christians had seems to be missing in a rather perfunctory, I have to go to Mass on Sunday kind of thing. And at a lecture by Clive Barnes that I attended recently, he mentioned an interesting idea that religion used to serve the purpose of this community gathering, and that now that this is passing, people are looking for that in other things, the football game type fraternity spirit, the rock concert, and things like that. Do you think that this lack of community spirit could be a reason for the decline in attendance at church that Mr. Buckley was speaking of?
Yes, it could in part. But something to remember, Miss, is that the world is always on a teeter-totter. And just as in literature, we had one moment, the classicism of Dryden, then we got into the romanticism of the late poets. So in religion, we had too much emphasis on the individual, complete neglect of the community. Today, we got a cry for community. We must all get together, boys and girls. And this indeed has to be emphasized. Now it is being so emphasized. We've got to keep balance. That the individual is alone, too. That he's also got to save his own soul, as well as saving the community. That while there must be much more relevance in the world, we also have to have considerable irrelevance. Because there are some things we think about in our own heart that have relations to the transcendent. And there must be a place for this. We cannot so emphasize the community that we're like a drop of water in a glass of wine, absorbed in even a spiritual kind of totalitarianism. And while this has to be stressed, I'm only saying, watch the balance. Let's not go overboard with communism and forget that there's such a thing as the individual.
Mr. Bird.
I'd like to talk about a problem that I think the Church has found itself related to, and that's the urban crisis that we have right now. And certainly we're all aware of it. And recently, there's been talk about the Church's non-commitment to that crisis. And I think we have examples of it in all the cities. And one problem that relates to property that the Church owns. Let's take the property that isn't specifically a church or a rectory, but that is used for private enterprise. that is not taxable. Do you think that the church, in a similar way that you talked about the government before, should make a recommitment, a monetary commitment to involve itself in the city? Because it would seem to me, in relation, for example, to the extent of land that the church controls in the District of Columbia, that there is a lot of good tax money that is certainly necessary to feed, house, and run the city that seems to kind of trickle away and that people never get a hold of.
That's a very good question. There are two points to your question. One is the church and its relatedness to property, and the other is the church and its relatedness to the urban problem. First of all, as regards property, the church doesn't have nearly as much wealth as is generally assumed. But as regards property, which you mentioned, I think that we must make a distinction, one, between that which is used for religious purposes, like schools and churches. Two, that property which will be used within a period of 3 or 5 years for religious and social purposes. And thirdly, property that was not within the planning of 3 to 5 years. That, I think, should be on the tax roll. That for property. Now then, as regards the urban crisis, it's rather popular to say that the church is not interested in the urban crisis. I came from a diocese where we paid $639 a day to just the urban crises of one city alone. $639 a day, 7 days a week, where simply because there was nothing being done for housing, we went out and bought 19 houses for blacks that had families and they were living in impoverished conditions. Unfortunately, the church has no megaphone and has not been able to express all that it is doing for the urban crisis. And then it's not to be forgotten that in one place there was an attempt to give away a church and a school and everything else in order to start housing for the poor. And the poor man was knocked on the head, whoever he was.
Greenfield.
I was going to ask you about whoever this man was, because it was an impression, Mr. Buckley, with sorrow, and myself with some happiness, share it, that you began your public career in a reasonably orthodox tradition, okay, political and theological, and that in recent years, particularly up in Rochester, there seemed to be a shift of direction into this kind of activity that you described. And I wonder if you could just, if it's a fair question, to tell us what led you to that decision that you were
First,
going to take.
you're assuming that I'm an entirely different clock at 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night.
No, just
I am not. Actually, the change was not in me. The change was in what was outside. The sun shines upon wax and softens it. It shines upon mud and hardens it. And the seeming change in character is often due to the environment that surrounds him. I was no different.
Well, there were hungry and poor people in the 50s as well as the 60s.
Listen, there's a great deal of difference, my dear Mr. Greenfield, between the poor of 50 and the poor of today. And this is something of which we have to take cognizance.
They're angry.
Yes, but today, the big difference is the poor today know they are poor. That's the great difference.
Let's think of it.
You mentioned that the church is trying to change with the change of the spirit of the times, but that it'll take time, like waiting for yeast to go through dough. But so many parishes, church on the local level, seem to be living in the past, where you have a pastor who keeps on preaching that dances are horrible, terrible things that are leading the children away, and that girls should stay in the home and things like that. This kind of thing seems to me to be alienating the youth, and that the time that it's going to take for this yeast to spread through the dough is just not going to be soon enough, and that so many people are being lost. What can be done about things like that?
Well, first of all, I think there are very, very few priests who would be opposed to dancing. I don't know any in any case. But you are quite right in saying that there should be a change. But something to remember is this. You cannot put a bomb under a baby and make it a man. There is the seed, and then there is the nourishment. All great permanent changes, most great permanent changes that involve life, demand time. We live in an age of immediacy. It's got to be aspirin immediate relief. Listen to the clock tick. If you'd only taken that aspirin 5 seconds before, now you wouldn't have a headache. Now you're all smiles because you took it a little early. Instant coffee. Everything has to be instant. And then it's instantly forgotten. So I agree with you. I'm always trying to strike a balance. I agree with you in saying that no, we're beyond those who take this position that there should be no dancing and so forth. But on the other hand, we must allow for a certain amount of growth.
I asked Archbishop Agide in Seville a few years ago how they were getting along without Cardinal Segura, who had died a month or so before, and she replied very piously, well, since the Cardinal died, he and we have passed on into a better world. So that was a nice way of saying it. Mr. Burr.
Yes, pursuing that last question, it seems to me that one of the beauties and the strengths of religion is oftentimes tradition, the good parts of the traditions, and certainly we have to make that distinction. But in viewing such things as the folk mass, the jazz mass, and all these attempts that it seems to me various factions of the church have made to get into it, but they've kind of petered out, and maybe that these things form a percentage of that drop in church attendance, and I was wondering how you feel about that.
You mean there's a decline in the folk mass and so forth?
Well, my personal feeling is that it really, not that it's not appropriate, but that it's not effective, and that it's the traditional thing that really is the strength of religion, the attempt one makes to grasp.
I was surprised to hear you say that, because I have heard some evidence too that there has been a decline. Now, as regards your expression of tradition, tradition is a memory. Law has precedent. An individual without memory is suffering from amnesia. A church, a nation that has not a history, is apt also to be without memory. So children are born into the world to give us novelty. There are old people that are born into the world to remind us that there is such a thing as a heritage. And again, we have to keep both together, the Nova and the Vetera, the new and the old.
And do you think that the dissatisfaction with the folk mass is related to what Mr. Burrs said, that people are discovering that they did not go there for that kind of experience of just a few seconds?
I'm not so sure. He could answer that question better than I could.
I'm afraid he doesn't have time, but thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you, members of the panel.
Peace be to you. This universe of ours is a free universe. It is a universe of character making, of soul making. Almighty God has placed into our hands, think of it, the power to make ourselves saints or devils. It is up to us. There are some laws that we cannot disobey. For example, the law of gravitation, certain biological laws like circulation of blood. But in our universe, we are free either to obey the laws of God or to disobey them, just as we are perfectly free, for example, to obey the laws of health or to disobey them. What then makes a thing good? What makes a thing bad? What makes a thing good? A thing is good when it attains the purpose for which it was made. I have before me now a stopwatch. I'm talking to you without any notes that are written out, merely developing ideas that have been given to those who are interested in these ideas for many, many years. Therefore, I have to have a watch before me in order to decide when I should stop. Is it a good watch? How will I know whether it is good? By asking, what is the purpose of a watch? The purpose of a watch is to keep time. Does it keep time? Yes. Therefore, it is a good watch. Now let us apply that to our ultimate end. Why were we made? What is the purpose of living? The purpose of living is to be supremely happy. How do we become supremely happy? By attaining the life, the truth, and love which is God. Anything I do, therefore, that helps me to attain that goal or purpose is good. Alongside of me is an organ. It is not in the church, it is in my office, rather in my home. As I talk to you, I am looking at the notes on that organ. Which note is good and which note is bad? Which note is right and which note is wrong? One cannot say that any particular note is right and any particular note is wrong. But what makes any note right or wrong? Its correspondence to a standard. Once I have a piece of music before me, I know what I ought to do, what note I should hit, what note I ought not to hit. So too, we have a moral standard within us, which is the conscience. And what is good and bad is in relationship to that standard, which is not of our own making. We do not draw our own maps and decide that the distance from Chicago to New York will be so and so. We do not arbitrarily set our own watches. We set them by a standard outside of us. When we buy any material, we do not decide that a yard, for example, will be 24 inches instead of 36. So the good, therefore, is that which helps us in relationship to the attainment of purpose and goals and destinies which are in accordance with right reason. What makes a thing bad? Well, here is a pencil. Is it a good pencil? Yes, it writes. That is why it was made. Is it a good can opener? It certainly is not. Suppose I use it as a can opener. What happens? First of all, I do not open the can. I do not attain the purpose for which I use the pencil. And secondly, I destroy the pencil. Now, if I, for example, decide to do certain things which I ought not to do, I do not attain the purpose that I hope to attain. For example, becoming an alcoholic does not make me happy. And furthermore, I destroy myself. Just as I destroy the pencil in using it to open a can. When I disobey God, I do not make myself very happy on the inside. And I certainly destroy any piece of soul that I ought to have. Evil, you see, is not positive. Evil is either an excess or a defect of what is good. An excess or a defect. Food is good. Too little of it is bad. Too much of it is bad. Drink is good. Too little of it is bad. Too much of it is bad. Sleep is good. When, however, sleep interferes with duty, it is not good. Evil is very much like darkness. It is the absence of light. It has no purpose inside of itself. Or rather, it has no substance of its own. That is a better way to put it. All badness is spoiled goodness. A bad apple is a good apple that became rotten. Because evil has no capital of its own, it is a parasite on goodness. Looking back then upon our reason and will in this universe, we can see, as we said before, that this universe is a veil of soul making. We were made to be good. We were made to attain the truth. But, oh, how weak we are. Look at the limitations of our reason, and then look at the limitations of our will. First of all, our reason. How poor it is. Even those that had very good reasons admitted that in the end they had captured but just a little of what was true. Isaac Newton, the great scientist, said that he felt as if he was standing on the seashore of infinite truth. And the vast waters of knowledge stretched endlessly before him. Socrates, one of the wisest of the Greeks, said, "There is only one thing that I know, and that is that I know nothing." Thomas Aquinas, who was the greatest mind that ever lived, said at the end of his life that all that he had written seemed to him as so much straw in comparison to a dim vision that he received of heaven. Then, too, quite apart from these learned men, look at the weak reason of people today, their confusion of mind, their failure even to recognize any such thing as truth or goodness. They will read one book on Monday and they will say, "Oh, I'm a materialist." Then they'll read another book on Tuesday and they're communists. Then they read another book later on in the week and they reject both of those systems. They're laying down tracks one day, carrying them up the next. They're planting seed one week, carrying the seed up the next. They're never working toward one goal. It's no wonder there are so many psychotics and neurotics in our world. They're just rehashing a lot of old errors and giving them new labels. Calling some of the old errors very novel. But that's only because they do not know what is ancient. Not only is our reason weak, but also our will. Even when we know what is right, how hard it is sometimes to do it. We are besieged by temptations. We often feel very much like Gacy. He said that he often wondered why he was one man, because he felt there was enough evil in him and goodness to make both a rogue and a gentleman. St. Augustine said, we may have occasion to quote this again, "Whatever I am not what I ought to be." Looking back, therefore, on what we are, we have to admit that our reason is weak. Our will is feeble. Our mind is dark. Our will is lame. We need help. We need more truth for our mind. We need more love and goodness for our will. Where are we going to get it? Could God give it to us? Oh, certainly God would give it to us, not because we are worthy, because rather it seems that it would be in keeping with His goodness to tell us something and to give us added power. And furthermore, we are teachable, we have minds. God could certainly give us new truths. Our nature is constantly receiving invisible forces. We would not have flowers and trees if there were no sun communicating light that we do not see. It's only that by which we see. So God might send either a visible or an invisible force to illumine us. And then also He could strengthen our will. And that certainly we need. We cannot lift ourselves by the lobes of our ears. Our aspirations are too weak. Look at the resolutions we take on New Year's and break. We need power. And that power has got to come from the outside. An electric light bulb is useless unless power is supplied from without. We have a stomach, but we need food from the outside. We have ears, but we need sound from the outside. Well, very well, then, God might indeed illumine our reason, but how would we know it? Suppose there was such a thing as revelation. Could we tell? Certainly there are many who make claims to be messengers from God. Reason has to set up certain standards, even before there is any revelation. We just simply cannot allow some man to come upon the stage of history and say, listen to me, I am from God. Or I had a revelation. I once received a telegram from someone, and the telegram read, report to Port 53, New York Harbor, to receive illumination from the Holy Spirit. Well, I'm very sure that the individual who sent it, whoever he was, believed that he had a revelation, but we cannot accept the revelation of any individual who claims merely that he has one. We cannot accept, for example, someone who says, I've got a book here, an angel wrote it for me. Why, this world of ours will be filled with crackpots. If Skyjack came to this country from Mars, we would say, show me your passport. How do I know you are from Mars? So too, if anyone is coming from God with a revelation for our reason and the strength for our will, reason is going to impose certain tests, and these tests are three. And they're tests that can be verified by reason and by history. First, whoever comes should be pre-announced. Two, he should work miracles in attestation of the fact that he is a messenger. Third, nothing that he ever teaches or reveals to us should be contrary to human reason, though it may be above it. Those are three tests. That's a standard. That's a measuring rod. First we say, anyone who comes should be pre-announced. After all, brides pre-announce their wedding. Automobile manufacturers tell us when a new model would appear, and if God is going to send someone to this earth, certainly the least that God can do is to let us know, I'm sending someone. That will do away with this idea of any individual suddenly appearing upon the stage of history and saying, I am God, or I have a message from God. That pre-announcement test will therefore be the test of prophecy. And secondly, there will be another test, namely miracles. He who comes ought to be able to do marvels, signs, to authenticate his message. Not so much. You see, in order to do things that would excite our wonder and make us say, oh, but rather, miracles that would prove that God was with him. And then thirdly, certainly anyone who comes to this earth must never in his teaching contradict human reason. We may indeed have, mysteries revealed to us that are above our reason. But they can never be contrary. For example, if anyone comes and teaches immorality, or that the soul is not immortal, well, we would know such a person could not come from God, because statements of this kind are contrary to reason. Looking back, then, we have three measuring rods or tests, designed by reason, applicable to history. Now, line up all the claimants that come from God according to their words. March them up. Line them up. Stand there, one by one. Let us say to them, we are going to judge you. Buddha, Confucius, Laozi, Mohammed, Marx, Brahmins, witch doctors, Hindu philosophers, university professors, Eddy, Heidegger, anyone you please, and the founder of the latest cult in New York or Los Angeles. Stand there. We want to ask you questions. First, and we're just going to use one test in this lesson. Were you ever pre-announced? Any one of you? Answer. Buddha? Did anyone ever know that you were coming to this earth? Confucius. Was the place of your birth prophesied? Socrates. Did anyone foretell that you would die of hemlock juice? Mohammed, was there ever an ancient tradition that you would be born among a certain people? Was there ever a description as to how you would die? Did any one of your mothers know that you were coming? Is there a single one of you that can point to an historical record in which it was foretold where you would live, where you would die, how you would die, what would be your character, the manner of your teaching, the kind of enemies that you would provoke and evoke by the dignity of teaching? Answer me. Is there no one that can step out? Up to this moment, you see, we have not regarded Christ as any different from any other messenger from God. Now one steps out of the ranks. What is your name? My name is Jesus Christ. Were you ever pre-announced? Are there any historical records long before your coming describing the details of your existence? Are there documents attesting to the work that you would do and the purpose of your coming? He is the only one that can answer, yes. So we say to the others, step back. You may be interesting, but you do not satisfy my first test. You were not pre-announced. And that's the least that God could do. You have only your own word. But we are interested in the person of Christ. He says he was pre-announced. In that case, we will have to study the documents. That will be the subject of the next lesson. God love you.
The camera has one eye out, only one little red light there. It's all right, don't. There are generally two little red lights on top of the camera. That one little red eye is out. It must have been out last night. The subject of this telecast is patriotism. I will give you the meaning of the title in a moment. This is a story about patriotism in the year 2024. A woman was elected President of the United States. The reporters approached the husband and said, "How do you feel about the election?" He said, "I regret that I have only one wife to give to my country." That has two eyes. The title, Quo Vadis America. I am giving this title, writing it down, for the sake of only 3 of you and the entire audience in the United States. Only 3. For the 3 of you who do not know Latin. Quo Vadis America. If you have ever been to Rome, you may have visited a chapel just outside of Rome. It was erected over a spot where, according to legend, Peter was in flight from persecution in Rome. And on the road, he saw a vision of the Lord approaching him. And Peter said to him, "Quo vadis, Domine?" "Where are you going, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am going to Rome to be re-crucified." In other words, Peter, that's where you should be. Well, we've chosen that title instead of Quo Vadis Domine, Quo Vadis America. America, where are you going? Where are we going in this day and age? Do you know one of the most unused words that we have in our vocabulary is the word patriotism? Hardly ever hear it anymore. Patriotism is a virtue that was allied to the old virtue of the Greeks and Latin called pietas. Pietas meant love of God, love of neighbor, love of country. And when one goes out, all go out. And we no longer have love of God. We have no longer have love of country. We're going to investigate in a particular way today the problem of revolution. We started our country with a revolution. Revolution is in the air today. As a matter of fact, the revolutionists of our day are all arguing and contending that, well, we started that way, therefore we should continue it. So, let us now investigate this question. Namely, we do live in America in a revolutionary tradition, certainly. But the question is, what kind of a revolution should we have? What kind of a revolution? There are 2 kinds. One, the kind we started with, the other, the kind we have today. What was the kind we started with? Well, I can tell it in the story of an old soldier who had fought at Concord. And someone said to him in his old days, "Why did you go to Concord on that April day? You suffered great oppression, didn't you?" And old Colonel Preston said, "No, I wasn't conscious of any great oppression from a foreign power." "Well, then, it's because you were against the Stamp Act." "Oh, I never saw any of the stamps. I think that General Bernard kept some of them in Castle William, but I never saw them. I certainly didn't fight on account of the Stamp Act." "Well, then you revolted on account of the tea tax." I never drank a cup of tea in my life. I wasn't interested in the tax. Well, then you must have been reading Harrington, Sidney, and Locke. Never read them. All I ever read was the Bible, Watts' hymns, and the Catechism. Well, then, why did you go to Concord? He said, for one reason. In order that we might govern ourselves. That was the American Revolution. To govern ourselves. Now, what's the revolution of today? What's its nature? Violence. Violence just for the sake of violence. That is ours. I mean, not ours. Please God, not any of ours. You or me. But I mean the new type of revolt, which involves destruction of everything that is in the past. And these people who are actuating violence today claim they're in the line of the American Revolution. They are not. Now let me go more into detail. These two types of revolution. Each of these had a character at the head who symbolized the revolutions. The one who best expressed the principles of the American Revolution was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is the antecedent of all Americans today who believe in self-government. Who's the progenitor of this kind of revolution? Someone who was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson. Strange to say. Saint-Just. 1793, revolution. Saint-Just and all who were associated with him in that revolution. Now let me tell you the difference between the two. And here we'll have a review really in pietas and in patriotism. And I will first of all describe what Jefferson taught us, what we believe, what are the conditions of the preservation of our country. Then I will give you Saint-Just, who holds exactly the same thing that the violent revolutionists of today hold in our country. They may not know that they are adopting his principles, but they are. Thomas Jefferson probably knew Saint-Just. They were in Paris together. But in order to do our American Constitution, Thomas Jefferson had to repudiate all of the principles of Saint-Just, whether he knew Saint-Just or not. See what wonderful work the angel does. Knows when to clean, when not to clean. Angel Clean, he's known as, not as Mr. Clean. Let's review the principles upon which our democracy was founded. Then let's review Saint-Just. Thomas Jefferson founded our democracy upon two principles. One, the dignity of man. Secondly, I will just simplify it, all rights and liberties come to us from God. I will explain these, and then we will go to Saint-Just. Without telling a word to my angel, he'll know very well that he shouldn't clean the board at this point. Thomas Jefferson. First, he believed that the government must be founded upon the respect for the individual. So he investigated what are the source of our rights and liberties. Where do they come from? Where does my right of free speech come from? Or the right of assembly, or any other right we have? From the will of the majority? If it did, the will of the majority could take away the will of the minority. Jefferson intended that the majority would be the custodian of minority rights. Do rights and liberties come from the federal government? Certainly not. If they came from the federal government could take them away. Taking almost everything else away. It might just as well take away our rights and liberties. But he set it down in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence that it is a self-evident principle, self-evident, that the Creator, has endowed man with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable. They cannot be taken away. Among which are the right to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is our democracy. Those are the two principles. And isn't it interesting that that particular government and those governments in the world that deny the existence of God are those that deny the existence of human rights? Now, let's go to Saint-Just. What did Saint-Just, and along with him Royer, what was their principle? Their principle was that in order to make people pass through a certain door, there was only one way to do it, and that was the way of terror. Confiscation of property, and the destruction of rights and liberties. Saint-Just also said, a people can be taught to save themselves only by violence. And the path to the establishment of every government must be upon a pile of corpses. That was the thing that Jefferson had to fight against when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He knew it, wasn't anything new. I'm bringing it up now to remind you that we're going through exactly that same crisis now that Jefferson faced. That our country today has to choose once more between Jefferson and Saint-Just. Which are we going to choose? We're familiar enough with the principles of Jefferson. So I'm going to enumerate for you. It'll be easy to identify the new type of violence that's sweeping our country, our schools, our streets. And I'm going to describe three characteristics. The first characteristic of the new violence of our day is what we will call elitism. Now, this word, I don't know whether it exists or not, but it's the only way that I can describe it. It's taken from the word elite. There used to be a virtuous elite. a core of heroes and saints that very much influenced any culture and democracy. The new elite practices what is called elitism. Namely, there is a dominant minority that makes a lot of noise and that uses violence to force its will upon others. They're revolutionists without a program. They have no flag. They only know what they're against. They do not know what they're for. And taking some words out of Toynbee, they're made up of two groups. Toynbee said the first group was conqueror. I would call one of the groups the man with the bullhorn. He's always the leader. You just watch in any violent group today that follows the principle of Saint-Just, watch the man with the bullhorn. He's the leader of that revolt. Secondly, there are the hangmen, the kind that are rifle desks, destroy property, burn homes, do anything to enforce their will. And then there are the wastrels, the group that just profit from violence, confiscate property to be in on the violence. That's the first group. I have 6 minutes and 7 seconds. So be patient. You'll have to wait about 6 minutes for a commercial, let me tell you, too. Second, mysticism. This is another new characteristic of the revolution. Mysticism is a term that belongs to religion. It doesn't belong, actually, in the field of politics, but has been transposed to politics. Now, what was mysticism? Mysticism was it could best be expressed in the mysticism of John of the Cross. Dodo, e nada. In other words, God or nothing. Now, you give yourself to God completely, or else you give nothing. This was spiritual mysticism. The political mysticism is, of course, there is no God. It's my will or nothing. This is what the elite insists upon. No alternative, no compromise. So they would make, in this mysticism, a tabula rasa. They would wipe the slate clean of anything that opposes them. And then after they destroyed life and property, they would ask for an amnesty and immunity. Thirdly, this is not my term. You could very well accuse me of having invented it. I've often thought of giving a telecast on it, but the other day I went into the 10-volume history of Toynbee, and lo and behold, I found Toynbee saying that idea which has been in my mind, namely Satanism. Satanism is behind it too. This is the third characteristic of it. The world is built on order. There's a plan. So scientists are able to discover the laws of the universe. And in discovering the laws of the universe, men find harmony. This harmony and order had to come from somewhere. It came from God. What is the essence of Satanism? The essence of Satanism is the destruction of that order. The order of law, the order of morality, order of religion, the order of ethics, anything that you please. This is Saint-Just in our day. Believe me, fellow Americans, I tell you that before the flood, in the book of Genesis we read, and in the days of Noah, there was violence on the earth. All of the violence that happens in our country is a fever graph. Read it. And it points to a decay in our civilization. How are we going to get out of it? The reason I'm hesitating here is just because there's so many ideas that I have to choose in the few minutes that are left which one to give you. I tell you one thing that we have to do. We have to realize maybe why the eagle is our national symbol. The eagle always builds its nest high in the mountain crevices. When the young are hatched, the eagle pushes its young over the nest. And they fly down to what to eaglet eyes must seem like sudden death. And just before the young eagle crashes, the mother eagle swoops down from its nest, down to the abyss, and catches the young, and then flies up into the sky, swoops from out it again, and repeats the process until the bird has learned to fly. Moses saw that, and he wrote, "As the eagle stirs among the young, so does God stir among the nations." Maybe God is stirring us, bringing us to the brink of danger, in order that we might begin to examine ourselves and restore Jefferson, the dignity of man, and a belief in God. Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the universities, down with schools, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government, down with the police. Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up to God. I've got a half hour more to tell you about this subject, but we haven't time, so just bye now, and God love you.